Look how far we came now.
And it's my settled conviction that open theism is really just a version of atheism.
Okay, well, an atheist is someone who doesn't believe that there is a God, or at least says that there's no evidence to believe that there is. I say I'm an anti-theist because I think it would be rather awful if it was true.
Recently, a confluence of events took place that just led me to start some stuff on open theism. I may hold off on doing as many broadcasts as I intended to do on this, because out of the first broadcast I did on it, a debate developed where, or at least, I agreed to do a debate with somebody, namely Warren McGrew, who has a web channel called The Idol Killer.
Why are you running?
Where did you go?
You're scared.
You're scared.
Right, and I should be clear on this, by the way. I'm not just saying that open theism is wrong when I call it heresy. There's a difference between heresy and arch heresy, or what we might call damnable heresy, okay? When I'm referring to open theism as heresy, I am referring to it as something that is utterly and entirely not Christian.
Anthony, why don't you maybe help people understand then, what do we mean by open theism?
What is open theism? In a nutshell, I usually describe it as simply the belief that possibilities are real. It really comes down to that. Possibilities are real. And that God, who is omniscient, knows all things, knows possibilities are real. Just like he knows that an elephant is an elephant and a monkey is a monkey and an actuality is an actuality, he knows a possibility is a possibility. It conflicts with the classical view.
Classical theism's ancestry includes Plato, Aristotle, Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism. It entered Judaism through Philo of Alexandria around the time of Christ. Philo sought to harmonize the Torah with pagan Greek philosophy.
It conflicts with the classical view, which held that when God created the world, and actually before God created the world, from all eternity, all facts were settled. So every fact of world history was resolved before the world was ever created, from all eternity. And then the classical view would debate whether God resolved it by willing it, and that's the more Calvinist perspective, or whether God simply knew it was resolved, and that's the more Arminian perspective. But either way, all facts are resolved. Open theists simply believe that when God created the world, he created it with possibilities, unresolved possibilities. And to the degree that the world consists of unresolved possibilities, then the fact that God knows is that it may go this way or that way. So it's really just the belief that possibilities are real. God created a world in which the future is to some degree open.
Now, the heresy of open theism is the idea that God knows the past and the present exhaustively, but he doesn't know the future exhaustively.
Fallacy.
Woo! Begging the question.
Anthony, why don't you maybe help people understand then, what do we mean by open theism?
It's my settled conviction that open theism is really just a version of atheism.
Fallacy.
Woo!
Depends on your definition.
Definition? Yeah.
Words mean something to me.
Atheism, in general, is the critique and denial of metaphysical beliefs in God or spiritual beings. As such, it is usually distinguished from theism, which affirms the reality of the divine and often seeks to demonstrate its existence.
Open theism is really just a version of atheism.
The atheist who believes in God.
Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality, the first principles of being, identity and change, space and time, causality, necessity, and possibility. It includes questions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between mind and matter, between substance and attribute, and between potentiality and actuality.
You trying to tell me the atheist now believes in God?
It's my settled conviction that open theism is really just a version of atheism.
First, open theism, it's like right there in the label, it's a form of theism. By that, I basically mean that there is a unique and necessarily existent being who is personal, call this being God, and this being is maximally perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, etc. And all other beings in some way depend on this being, on God, for their existence. Future contingency, this is the idea. Here I'll be focusing on the idea that some creatures have libertarian freedom, and that means a kind of freedom that's indeterministic. It's not compatible with determinism. Future contingency is the idea that the future is, at least in some respects, is causally open. There are multiple. We think of a future as an extension of the actual past and present. Then we could say that if the future is causally open, then there are multiple causally possible futures.
So kind of the way I guess I would think of that, like in a picture, would be like an arrow that has multiple branches.
Yeah.
And so the part that they all share, that's like our actual past. But now, like at this point where the branches begin, each one is really a possible future. They all have the same past, but each one could be actual.
Yes, that's a great way to explain it. The third point, here I'm calling it EC incompatibility. That the E stands for epistemic, which means having to do with knowledge, and the C for causal. So the idea is about EC incompatibility, as I spell it out here, it's impossible for the future to be epistemically settled in any respect in which it is causally open. So what does that mean? For the future to be epistemically settled means that, it's just like what you have on the traditional view of the foreknowledge of God, that there is a specific way the future is going to go from here on out, right? The entire course of history is sort of infallibly known by God, so there's no doubt in God's mind, as it were, how things are going to play out moving forward. If that's the true, then we would say the future is epistemically settled. Obviously, it's not going to be settled in that sense for us, but we're finite creatures. We don't know a lot of stuff. But the idea behind a lot of, behind all of kind of the non-open future views is that there is sort of a fact of the matter about how the future is going to go exhaustively. And God, being omniscient, knows all truths, and so God knows that. And so the future is epistemically closed or settled from God's perspective. What I'm going to be arguing with this EC incompatibility is that, if the future were settled, then it could not also be causally open. In other words, future contingency and foreknowledge are incompatible.
You can't have the future being epistemically settled and it being causally open. Those are incompatible. That's the point.
That's the claim I want to make. And it's because open theists accept that claim, and they accept, number two, that there are future contingents, that we conclude, number four, that the future is epistemically open. Not just for us as finite creatures, but open for anyone, open for God.
What it is they claim to be holding, namely, God knows the past and the present exhaustively, but he doesn't know the future exhaustively. And part of the rationale for this is if God knows the future exhaustively, then it's in some sense settled in advance. And that's not a notion that sets easy with them. They don't want this idea that somehow what they're going to do in the future is certain.
Lately I've been reflecting on where I'm from, where I'm headed. Footprints in the sand, showing where I've been at, one brick at a time. Shipwreck from the get-go, man, I've been cold. Tell them catch on, it's another tempo. Dark world, but I still glow. Walk with the king, I'm seeing real growth.
Now, there are any number of ways that Christians have grappled with that issue. There are different ways Christians have answered that. Right. There are those who would say that God has ordained all that will come to pass. When I say that God predestines, I might use that language that, does, assume sort of a before and an after. But that doesn't mean that this is not anthropomorphic, since Scripture's clear. God is temporal.
Everything happening, I somehow thought to myself, through this journey, how have I got this far?
That's so great.
Now, the heresy of open theism is the idea that God knows the past and the present exhaustively, but he doesn't know the future exhaustively.
So say you take dynamic omniscience just to mean that God does not know the future. And again, you hear this a lot in a lot of the popular discourse. But that definition gives us, again, like this really weird result. So let's go back to Paul Helm, the Calvinist and classical theist. So Helm affirms what's called the B theory of time, and is an attempt to defend divine timelessness. And so on the standard account of the B theory, there's no such thing as past, present, or future, because all moments of time of the timeline like they equally exist, and they're ordered in like these before and after and simultaneous relations. But there's no objective present, there's no objective past or future. And so what this means is, like, quite literally, there are no facts about what will happen in the future. And so there are no future facts for God to know because there are no future facts. So it entails that God doesn't know the future facts because there just aren't any. And so if dynamic omniscience simply means that God does not know the future facts, then Paul Helm and then every B theorist is going to be forced to affirm the dynamic theory of omniscience.
There are those who will give different ways of accounting for how God knows the future, right? There's the Calvinist or Augustinian answer. There is the Arminian answer, the answer of Molinists and proponents of middle knowledge.
Calvinists and Molinists historically have held that in the life of God, there was a moment, either temporal or logical, prior to the divine decree where the future was open for God. Thus Antony's own tradition, Calvinism, begins with an open premise and therefore meets its criteria to be deemed atheism and damnable heresy.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. That's huge. So huge.
So what we're talking about here is like God existing all alone prior to the existence of the created universe. And that's the classical position of creation ex nihilo. That's what open theists today say about creation ex nihilo. So that's something everyone agrees on. There's this actual prior state of affairs where God exists all alone without any created thing. And then from there, what the Calvinists and the Molinists do is they start carving up God's life into distinct logical moments. And so I want people to notice something very important here. So at the moment of natural knowledge, God only knows what could happen if he were to create. So at this logical moment, God does not know what will happen, because God does not even know if he himself will create anything at all. So as Calvinists like Terence Thiessen and Molinists like Thomas Flint, as they make very clear, at this logical moment, there are not even any true counterfactuals of divine freedom. And you might ask, why? Well, because the future is alethically open at the first logical moment of God's life. God has not yet determined to create it all, nor has God determined that any particular timeline should come about. In other words, there is no fact of the matter about what God will do at the first logical moment of natural knowledge. So facts about what God will freely do are contingent facts, and thus fall outside of the scope of natural knowledge, which only covers necessary facts. And that is, well, I mean, it's going to be shocking for people whose only knowledge of Calvinism is just the internet.
And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
I really can choose between vanilla and chocolate ice cream. Well, that's pretty trivial. But there are major choices that we make that are really important, and it's really up to us at the time that we choose which way we go. Now, if that's really the case, then it has implications concerning the nature of the future. It says that what the future will be at a given point of time is, to a certain extent, undecided. Now, not in every respect undecided. The way the Earth revolves around the sun and the moon around the Earth and so on and so forth, these things are governed by laws of nature that certainly no human being has the power to annul or to do much about. You know, We just have no control over these things, and the same for a lot of things that happen on the earth. So in those respects, the future is firmly fixed. But in respects that depend on the free choices of human beings, the future isn't fixed. And if this is true, then when God looks to the future, I mean, it's not like there's a movie of the future and God is running the projector and he's shown it up until the point where, let's say, Frodo and Sam go off to Mordor, and the rest of the film is right there in the can, ready to be shown. No, the future is a realm of possibility in large extent, and what God knows concerning the future is what the possibilities are. Now, he knows incredibly more about that than any of us is able to know. He knows not only what the possibilities are, but what the likelihood is of things going in various different ways. Also, God knows that there are some things that God has himself decided are going to happen in a certain way. And if God decides that he's going to have things happen in a certain way, he is capable of making sure they happen in that way. Of course, if God decided that about everything, then he could be certain about everything that's going to happen. But if he is indeed endowed us with free will, then that isn't the case. Why would God take such a chance? Well, that's a long story. We can go into that if we want to, but we believe that he has endowed us with free will. And so again, in many respects, the future simply is undecided. Now, God is perfect in knowledge, but that doesn't mean that God knows as definite something which in reality is indefinite, okay? I mean, that would be contradictory. So if there really are alternative possibilities for the future, different ways that the future really can turn out, then God, who is perfect in knowledge, knows that. He knows the different ways that it could turn out. And furthermore, God has the wisdom and the power and the resourcefulness to deal appropriately with any of the things that might happen.
Yeah, so to summarize this account of dynamic omniscience, I think you need to say basically three things. So first, you're going to say God is omniscient in the sense that God knows all of the facts, just knows all the facts. And then second, the dynamic theory of time, you're going to have to say that's true because there are tense facts that change their truth value over time. And then third, I guess is the most important part, there is some moment in God's life where the future is going to be alethically open. And again, that just means that there's some moment in God's life where the truth values about future contingent propositions are not completely settled. So that's the summary.
I may hold off on doing as many broadcasts as I intended to do on this.
Retrograde. Nothing ever looks the same. Retrograde. Reflecting on the steps that we've made. Retrograde. Retrograde. Keep a snake under my feet, it's nothing to me. Plus I know who's covering me, uncover the scene. All I see is grace for days are paid away.